Many people coming in interested. Tom Crete and I have known each other since many years ago when Tom was a young funeral director at Martinson's and I was the young associate pastor at St. Francis Cabrini in Allen Park. So Tom and I have known each other for about 25 years. Please welcome Tom Crete for Martinson Funeral Homes.
I've aged much better than he has, haven't I? Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely honored to be asked by Father Bill and Kay, your pastoral administrator, to be here. I want you to pretend for a second that I'm in my jeans and a sweatshirt instead of my suit and tie. Trust me, if I wasn't working today or presenting to you, I would be in my casual clothes. My point of that is I'm just like you. Father Bill and I have families, and for those of you that have ever heard me speak at a funeral, I often talk about reminding everyone that Father Bill and I, just because we do it a little more often, or Kay even, or the music director, doesn't mean we get used to it. It's quite the opposite. As I get older, attending the funeral, and for me being a director to help people plan is getting more difficult. I'm getting older. The clock is ticking. I'm not 20 years old anymore. I've been a licensed funeral director since I was 21 years old. So you can start to do the math. I started working for the Martinsons in 1979 as a college senior, and then full-time in 1982, and that's when Father Bill and I would have met a few years later when he was a pastor. So that, a little bit about me. I'm one of 7 kids, Catholic kids, proud to say. I like to think that my faith has served me well. One of the things that folks will ask me quite often is, how do I do what I do every day? How do you do it? Well, there's 3 things, and I mean this very sincerely. And I'm going to keep looking around the room. I like to make eye contact with people. So if I don't look right at you, don't be offended. But there are 3 things that serve me every day. One is my faith. My faith is very important to me. I'm not the best Catholic boy, but I've tried my whole life. So faith is very important. My sense of humor, and an occasional glass of red wine or beer. My point is that I'm normal, just like you. I lost my train of thought. All right, I got notes here, so I know the topic, it's just I got to say it. It's called Sometime disease. What I wanted to share with you, though, is that there's been a lot of changes since Father Bill and I first met in the church and in funeral service. And to kind of put that into perspective, I want to tell you a quick story. I'm from Bay City, or Essexville, Michigan, for those of you who know where that is, 130 miles north of here. My home parish was St. John the Evangelist in Essexville. And my dad called every Sunday like he normally does. We do the litany every Sunday. He calls each one of us 7 kids on Sunday night. He's been doing it for years. If nothing else, just to say that he loves us. So during this litany, my dad starts to tell me the story about my parish, merging or clustering. You've had some effects of that downriver, right? So we all know that that's happening. So he starts to tell me that St. John the Evangelist and St. James Parish in Bay City were going to be clustering together, and that the parishioners were given the opportunity to name the new parish. They were going to submit new names to the bishop, et cetera, et cetera. A 12-year-old boy was able to submit the winning entry. St. James Parish in Bay City, St. John the Evangelist, or St. John the Evangelist, if you will, and St. James Parish, were going to merge. Any idea what the new parish name was going to be? This 12-year-old boy. It was going to be St. Jimmy John's. So, now that I have your attention, Father Bill and Kay sent me some things that they wanted me to try to cover. So the first one was, what does a funeral home offer? And I'm going to try to speak in generalities. Where did that water go?
It's out.
Right there. I have allergies, so I take the medication when you get dry mouth. So I'll speak in generalities, not just about Martinsons. I would like to think that all of my colleagues would be able to provide what I do or what we do. The reality is that that's not the case. Much like other commodities or services that all of us need someday, we're not all the same. All priests aren't the same, all churches aren't the same. I think we instinctively know that, but somehow the public seems to put funeral homes and funeral directors all in the same box. I'm not quite sure why that is, but it's very important that you understand that is not the case. And it starts with the philosophy of the ownership of the funeral home. I've worked for the Martinsons for all these years, and I like to say that our company is compassion-driven. I'll say that again, compassion-driven, not commission-driven. So as you go through life and you choose where you have to choose a funeral home, always keep that in mind. We live in the Downriver area, and I like to think that a lot of my colleagues here are very compassion driven. I'm not with them every day, but I like that it's very important that you think about that. Some firms have become real big conglomerates, and they have the local flavor. You see me, but in reality it's owned by some big corporation that isn't even located here. So all of the things I talk about should be able to be done by any funeral home. There are different types of final disposition. That was one of the questions that was asked. We all know about earth burial. It's burial in the ground. The second would be entombment, which is above ground burial. The little drawers, as people tell me they call them, those are actually called crypts, an individual crypt. A niche is a small drawer, if you will, for cremated remains. So burial, entombment, cremation, which when I first started in this business in the early 70s, almost nobody was cremated. And I'll go back to that in a minute. What I'm going to do is just talk for a few minutes, because I've done this dozens of times in my career, sometimes small groups. I think the biggest one I've ever did was about 400 people at a church. So that was quite interesting. But then what I like to do is let you ask me questions, because I think when we do that, I learn, you learn, and it's not so rich. Plus, I'm going to be boring if I just talk to you for a minute. So burial, entombment, cremation. One that people don't think about a lot is anatomical donation, where you would gift your body to a medical school, and I can address that as well. And then it wouldn't be a final disposition, but it's transferring your loved one from Michigan to another state or even a foreign country. And our firm have done that many times over the years. Not too many times going out of the country, but a few times coming back. The farthest away I think I sent anybody was Australia and China. One of your former pastors died in Mexico, Father Bob. I don't even remember Father Bob.
Yeah.
Great guy. I love him. Almost as much as Father Bill. But our firm had the privilege of bringing him back from Mexico. So those are the types of things that you never know what's going to happen. And before I forget this, if you ever have a death away from home, the best advice I can give you is to call back here to Michigan to the firm that you would use if the death occurred here, and let them guide you, regardless of what a nurse or a doctor or anybody else says. You're just going to have to trust me. If you're in California and the death occurs, they try to tell you to call a local funeral home, call Chopek's first, call Martinson's first, call Nixon's first. Let us try to guide you. And one of the reasons you can do that is it may save you a lot of money and hassle. We know what questions to ask. We will arrange for the funeral home in California. Follow that? Everybody understand that? I'll try not to jump around too much. So the funeral homes ought to be able to help you with all the details, regardless of whether you choose burial, cremation, entombment, etc. Obituaries, death certificate material. We have to secure the death certificate, take care of memorial markers for graves, flowers. Sometimes there's special jewelry that the family wants us to get. A lot of times with cremated remains, there are companies that put a little teeny portion of the cremated remains or the ashes in the jewelry. Our firm will do Social Security notification, life insurance claims, veterans information. Our firm offers an attorney at no cost to the family if you need to speak to an attorney for any reason and don't have one. The Martinson family pays for one of our attorneys to meet with you, usually at our office, to ask legal questions that even if Tom Creed or Johnny Martinson knows the answer, I can't give you legal advice because I'm not an attorney. So to help people with that initial investment, the Martinsons pay for an attorney who's licensed in Michigan to sit down with you and answer those questions to help you determine whether you need legal counsel. I think it's a pretty good perk, actually. One of the other things that was asked by me by Father Bill was, what is required by law? It's kind of a broad question. There is really no law that requires anything. If there's a death, there's no law that says that the next of kin has to do anything. I know that sounds strange, but there's no law that says that you need to do something. You could literally just leave the person, I suppose, and drive away. So there's no law that says that, but obviously most families are going to choose burial, cremation, entombment, one of those types of things. I know that on the AARP website, because I looked just to see what they've changed, one of the things that AARP says, quote, will the body be embalmed or cremated? Unquote. Will the body be embalmed or cremated? In other words, it's either embalmed or it's cremated. Is that the way you would read that? that isn't the case. A lot of people that choose cremation still have embalming because they have a funeral visitation first. So it's not cremation or embalming. And for a lot of Americans, it's either the traditional funeral or not. And that's not the case. Most people that come to St. Cyprian's will have a traditional mass with the casket present. Mass of Christian burial first, and then cremation may happen. So it's still the Catholic funeral, just that they chose cremation instead of burial. So it isn't one or the other. Embalming is a big one. People want to know, is it a law that you have to be embalmed? In Michigan, there is two phases to this. If a person dies, or when a person dies, I should say, there is no if. I laugh because people will say that to me all the time. Hey, Tom, if I die, I want you to take care of me. Like we have a choice. But I think subliminally, we're going to live forever, so we don't say that. But if a person dies within, is not, we got to remember the exact wording, does not reach their final destination within 48 hours, and the word destination is cremation, burial, or entombment, or anatomical donation, but really those three. Within 48 hours, the state of Michigan requires that the person be embalmed. So, legally, a funeral home can require a family pay for embalming and say so because of state law, because of the 48-hour rule. That's what the law says. The law was written at least in the 40s. Realistically, I'd like to think for most of my colleagues, we have the facilities now, that is, refrigeration facilities, that we didn't in the 40s. So even though legally a funeral home can require embalming after 48 hours and tell you that you have to pay for it, in my personal estimation, and I work for the Martinson family, it isn't necessarily ethically the right thing to do. Does that make sense? So keep that in mind. The other thing that the state of Michigan law says is if a person dies of diphtheria, smallpox, scarlet fever, the plague, or meningitis, if I know as a licensed director in the state of Michigan that death occurred of one of those things, whether the family wants embalming or not, we have to legally embalm that person. Now, most of those have been wiped out. They were very contagious diseases, and there was, all kinds of problems. Well, embalming the body temporarily preserves the person, but it also disinfects. I don't like to use that word, but that's essentially what it does. So embalming helped prevent the spread of some of those diseases years ago, which is why the law is still in the books. They're still highly contagious. If somebody gets meningitis, it's a big time, or diphtheria. Interesting, AIDS isn't there, hepatitis isn't there. They're not communicable diseases like those others. AIDS, for example, is a very easy virus to kill. Hepatitis, on the other hand, is not. But those are the questions that come up sometimes with people that do that. It hasn't happened in a long time. I can't remember the last time I had anybody of anything but meningitis. I don't think I've ever had anybody with diphtheria in all these years. So it's, the medical field has done a good job of wiping that out. So back to the embalming. That's the only two things. One of those diseases, or if the person doesn't reach their destination within 48 hours. The reason why most people think it's a state law is most funeral homes will require embalming, whether the state does or not, if you're going to have visitation with the casket open, either at the funeral home or at the church. And the reason that we do that, and the reason the Martinsons require it, is because embalming to me is the highest form of what I call sanitary care and respect that we can do for somebody else that we care about. I have no doubt that all of you would embalm your own family member or take care of them and nurse them if you knew how. Most of us would. You don't know how, so the funeral home does it for you. And I'm proud to say that I used as much care with your mom or dad or whoever it might be as it would be my own parents. So that's why most people think, geez, I thought it was a state law. No, most funeral homes require it. If you want a closed casket, you don't have embalming. It doesn't happen very often, but the point is that I'm going to keep coming back to this word. You should always, always, always be in control of your choices at whatever funeral firm you use. You're in charge. I'm not in charge. You are. Our firm isn't in charge. You are. Our job isn't to tell you what to do. Our role is to be counselors. I'm no longer just a funeral director. I'm an event planner. Seriously, we don't have funerals. People don't like funerals sometimes. It wasn't good for them. The traditional funeral, they didn't like it. So what we've done is we've just changed the wording to a life celebration event. Most people want to celebrate someone's life, right? But they didn't want the traditional funeral, so let's not call it that. Let's do it at Elizabeth Park instead of, if they're not churched for whatever reason. I'm kind of going off the tangents here, but if nothing else, when I leave you, I want to pique your curiosity so you ask what you might think is a silly question of me or someone else at some point down the road. Father Bill wrote down, okay, how long can a body wait for a funeral? Great question. There really is no time frame, practically. If the person's embalmed, it can be a long, long time. The longest I ever waited was 3 months. A person looked great. Didn't look anything different. And the situation behind that is the guy that died's son was in the military, the Navy. I found out by talking to the family that he was classified. Anybody that's in the military knows that classified means that the mom or dad or the next of they have no idea where they are. Well, in this case, he was on a submarine. And the mother, the widow, or the mother of the guy that's on the submarine, knew that her son might come off of this classified status soon based on previous experience. So I said, would you like to wait? And it was like I gave her a candy dish at Christmas. I can? Well, we didn't think we were going to wait 3 months, but I tell you what, his son was pretty bummed out that his dad died, but he was thrilled that Martinson's waited so he could attend his dad's funeral. So really is no time frame. Again, we have refrigeration facilities. That's only a short-term thing, but there really is no time frame, so no one should ever push you that. You know, my family's all over the country. If we have to wait, a person dies today, we have to wait till a week from now, Monday, to start visitation and the funeral. Our firm will wait as long as you have to. We don't have a per diem fee to hold the remains under our care. I know some firms do, but we do not. That's always a really good question. Costs, that's a big one for people. There are funeral home costs and there are external costs. The funeral home costs are guided or mandated by Federal Trade Commission guidelines. Every funeral home in the United States must have what they refer to as a general price list. I call it an a la carte menu because all of you know what that is, and you understand that if you pick something off the menu, there's a fee attached to it. Prior to 1984, there were a lot of funeral directors across the country that had funeral packages, and the history behind that is back when we were undertakers. Most of us were also woodworkers. There'd be a death in the community, and the undertaker would be called, and I'd ask you what type of wood you want me to use. My dad wanted a pine box. That's always the answer I get, is pine box. So my brother and I were the woodworkers, and we would build a pine box. And I'd take my tape measure. This is where the joke comes from, by the way. Careful, Tom's going to measure. We'd measure the person, kind of get an eyeball of how big they were, and we'd go custom make a coffin to accommodate the person's size that died. The price of the box was the price of the funeral, hence the package. So the bill includes everything. Families needed everything. They needed a casket. They needed flowers. They needed a marker. They needed death certificates. They maybe needed a rosary, or in our case, prayer cards. It's just really easy for me to say, Mary, Cecilia. Not allowed for Mary. It includes everything. It was just really easy for us to say that. It kind of made you feel at ease that, you know, Tom took care of everything, or Father took care of everything. So that's where that came from. Well, I started working at funerals in 1974. Americans are already starting to veer away from all the traditional things. They may have mass, but maybe they didn't do the visitation first. Do it strictly here at church. Well, why would you pay for stuff at the funeral home when you're just doing stuff here at the church? You follow? Well, when everything was lumped together, it was very difficult for Martinsons or Chopeks or Nixons or whoever else to randomly take an abstract number out of the lump, because it was all in there. So when I started working for the Martinsons, Mr. Martinson would take the lump, and on the back side of the card, he might itemize it all to equal the lump. No hairdresser. Maybe mom was bald and she liked being bald. You follow what I'm doing? So in 1984, the federal government said, hey, Mr. Martinson and these progressive funeral homes are onto something. And they passed a federal law that all funeral homes had to itemize everything. It was for your benefit. And maybe you can tell that I was a huge proponent of itemization. I found in my career that adults are very, very smart. Even kids are very smart. They just don't know anything about funeral service. So our role is in a couple-hour period to educate you and make you feel comfortable enough for you to make the decisions about whether you need this or that, or we just want the mass, or do you follow? So that's very important that you understand that wherever you go, you should be presented with an itemized general price list, or a la carte menu, as I call it. The traditional funeral in America today, except, that's not the right word. What's the word I'm looking for? I'll change that. Not counting outside expenses like cemetery, airfare, and that kind of thing. The average traditional funeral with earth burial at a funeral home, at least in Michigan right now, is about $7,000. On top of that, you'd have whatever cemetery expenses you have. Now, depending on where you read, they can change that average, but that's about average. Yes, things have gone up and are inflated, just like when I was young. My first couple cars were Pintos, so everybody knows that I'm 55 years old. My Pinto got me from point A to point B on a date just like my Malibu does now. It's just that my Malibu was 30,000 cars and my Pinto was 750. My point is that things are inflated. Going out for dinner and that kind of stuff. Everything is inflated. The least expensive thing that you can do is anatomical donation, because the universities normally don't charge for that. So you can't get it less than free. Our funeral home just has a minimal charge to get the person from the place of death to Ann Arbor, let's say, or to Michigan State or to Wayne State. Those are the 3 schools in Michigan that do anatomical donations. In fact, I don't know if Michigan State still does or not, but I think so. So that would be the least expensive thing you do. Our firm happens to work with the state of Michigan for folks that are on Medicaid, not Medicare, but Medicaid. Medicaid kicks in when there's zero money. Families have no income at all. And the maximum benefit right now from the state of Michigan for a cremation is $600. The maximum, if there's going to be a burial, is $700. Well, you can't do a whole lot for $600 or $700. Excuse me. Our firm, at no outside expenses to the family, will provide a simple cremation at 0 expense to the family. Mr. Martinson accepts the $600 from the state of Michigan. And the reason I like to tell people that is that you can't get it less than 0. And sometimes when I talk to families, I don't think they believe us until they actually come in and we provide them with the documents to take to the state. So it is literally 0 out of pocket to have a simple cremation. You compare that with if you were the regular paying customer, for most firms, it's $1,500. It's a pretty big difference, 0 or 1,500. Let me go back to my notes so I don't go too far back. Father said, well, what about the deceased wishes? And he alluded to that earlier. Now, this is a really delicate subject for me. Like I said, I've been doing this for a long time. And when we get together in the church or at the funeral home or whatever, guess what, folks? The deceased isn't there. The body's there. Their spirit's there. But they're not in attendance. So if a person has made their own arrangements so that their wishes are being met, and the wishes of the decedent don't meet the psychological needs of the survivor, it gets really, really uncomfortable around my table at the office. The kids want to do this. The dad's wishes were this. In fact, the dad came to the funeral home and prepaid for it. Can you see where this can get really, really uncomfortable? To the point where I have to walk away and let them hash it out. So this is what I tell people that I love, including my family. And I had to run around and around and around with my mother for years until my mom's best friend died, and she finally got it. My mom's best friend died, and the friend's wishes were no funeral, nothing. My mother was devastated. She did not get a chance to say goodbye. There was no mass. There wasn't even a memorial mass. And then the light bulb went on that Laura got her wishes, but all the people that she left behind psychologically had nothing. So this is what I tell people that I love. If you're going to make your own prearrangements, and I encourage that you do, leave your kids or who you think is going to be your survivors with an out. So I'm going to turn it back to me. I have 3 daughters. My youngest is 25. My oldest is 38. She's got 5 kids. I don't think you knew that she had 5, by the way. She's got 5. She's been real fertile Myrtle here lately. So this is what my wife Gail and my kids know about what Tom wants. They know that I want to be buried in Bay City. I want to be buried there because that's my roots. For 100 years almost, my family's there, and I have no idea where my kids will go. So I don't want them to have to feel like they got to come back to Allen Park, which is where I live, someday when they live in California or Las Vegas or whatever. I'm pretty comfortable with it. My heritage will always be in Bay City. But what they do before they take me to Bay City, I don't care. And I don't mean it in a flippant way. Of course I care. What I mean is I need to let them do whatever they psychologically need to do. I don't know the place, the circumstances, I don't know anything about where I'm going to die. And so if I've said I want to do this and this and this and this and this, and it doesn't meet their needs, in my effort to do them a favor, I may have not done them a favor, because now I've put them on Dad's wishes, this is what we need to do. So I encourage you to pre-plan, but tell your kids that you've done it. But guys, you know what? If you need to do something a little bit different, it's okay with your dad and I. And I mean that with as much love as I possibly can. It's awful when I sit there with people who have pre-planned their own funeral so that their wishes will be met, and some of my colleagues promote it like that. And then I'm sitting there with their kids and they fight with, they're crying, it's uncomfortable for me. So that's how I would address that situation. Let's talk a little bit about pre-arranging, not only pre-planning, but pre-funding. At least in our firm, and I would like to think this is the case everywhere else. You can pre-plan without prepaying. It's two parts. The Martinses don't charge to pre-plan. You can spend 2 hours with me, walk away, and never come back again. I've spent 2 hours with you, it didn't cost you a penny. It cost you some time, but we don't charge for pre-planning. The way Martinsons work, we're going to get, if we do the funeral, then we'll get paid for the time that I spent with you. 10 years later, or earlier. In the state of Michigan, if you pre-plan and want to prepay your funeral, 100% of that money that you pay me, let's say that the total is $5,000. I'm just going to use some random numbers to make it easy for you to try to follow along. Am I talking too fast? Sometimes I get up to hurricane speed and I can't slow down. But if the items that you pick off of the menu, the general price list, equal $5,000, and I say to Kay, if this is what we did today, you died today, because I role play with people. I try not to freak them out, but if they die today, this is what it would cost. The Martinsons have to, or the funeral homes in Michigan have to take 100% of that $5,000, not 60% like the cemeteries. 100% of it has to be escrow. You shall, if you ever pre-arrange it, it's very important that within a couple, 3 weeks, you get paperwork from an outside third party that said that Martinson Funeral Home set $5,000 aside with us. It could be in an insurance vehicle, life insurance, for a specific purpose, funerals, or it could be in a trust. Either way, it's escrow. The point of that is, in my example, you gave me $5,000, but now you've moved to Scottsdale, Arizona. 20 years go by, you look great. And then you're 95 or 100 years old, you live in Scottsdale, and the kids say, you know, we don't need to bring mom and dad back, we're just going to do it up in Scottsdale. We give Mr. Martinson $5,000 in 2013. Well, it's not Martinson's money. It's in the trust. You go to a funeral home in Scottsdale, they work with you, they submit the claim to get paid the $5,000 plus whatever it's grown. Everybody follow? It was never Martinson's money. It's not Nixon's money or Chopek's money. Who am I forgetting? It's close. Gearbacks. I don't want to leave anybody out. Everybody follow what I just did. It's very important that you understand that. There are a lot of folks that won't pre-plan because they're afraid that they gave me $5,000. What if we go out of business? Remember, it's not our money, it's in a trust. So you hear these stories in the paper of someone that got bilked by a funeral director that did not do what they're supposed to do. They took $5,000 but didn't trust it. That's why I'm going to tell you one more time. You need to get paperwork within a couple of weeks from a third party stating that the Martinson Funeral Home or ABC Funeral Home deposited with us $5,000 for the benefit of William Permesso. Sorry, Father God. I don't want to put you on the ground yet. It's very, very important. It breaks my heart when any of these articles are done in the paper because it's like someone puts a knife in me. I've never done anything wrong, at least I know of. Illegal or unethical or whatever. And when this stuff happens to folks, it's a black eye for me and for all of my colleagues who are quote unquote doing it the right way. So that's very important. What else here? Things like flowers, headstones, limousines, those are all optional items for people. You can be buried in a cemetery and not mark the grave. The Our Lady of Hope doesn't require that you get a marker. can't go unmarked. Most people will get a marker, but you don't have to. You don't need a limousine, you don't have to have flowers. I've had many funerals where there's no flowers whatsoever. Zero, zip, nada. Probably the best one was an Italian who did not like flowers, but he was a master tomato grower. And the reason I knew that is because I try to interview the family to find out what makes the person tick. Because it's not funeral A. You know, my funeral's going to be different than yours or someone else's. So this gentleman liked flowers. So I said to his wife, it was in May, I said, why don't you bring some of his tomato plants? I can, of course. No flowers at the funeral at all. Hundreds of tomato plants. Because all the relatives and friends sent tomatoes as well. So the reason I like to tell you that is that there's a lot of out-of-the-box stuff that we're doing today. That if my colleagues don't do this stuff and don't start thinking out of the box, they're going to go out of business. Most of you are at least 30. Okay, so we know all the traditional stuff. But our kids and grandkids aren't necessarily going to be served by some of the traditional stuff. I'm very traditional in my faith. You know, the traditional Catholic funeral mass for me is very important. I mean, I can't force that on anybody. You know, the church teaches us that. So I'm talking as a Catholic funeral director now, not just a pagan. So it's very important that you understand that. Did I cover the pre-funding stuff enough, you think? Go ahead. I'm going to let you ask questions here in a minute.
I thought the pre-planning meant that you picked out your casket and everything.
It could. You just made an assumption that you need a casket. I'm not trying to be funny. Nobody needs a casket, ever. Ever. Most of us guys, because we're macho and we try to show up, we think it's, you know, John Wayne-ish. You know, Tom, when I die, I want to be in a pine box. You can. Our Lady of Hope will let you be buried in a pine box. No pillow.
But if you pick one out
Mm-hmm.
and the price goes up,
Yep.
so how does that work?
Okay. Great question. Everybody hear what you said? If you pre-plan and things go up, because it isn't just the casket necessarily, because you may not have needed a casket. And I'll go back to the pine box thing in a minute, but don't let anybody ever tell you you need a casket. Ever. You can be buried in a pine box. The cemeteries want to handle the remains in something. I can't just pick you up. Our Lady of Hope will require a grave liner for a vault, but you do not ever have to have a casket, and yes, you can make your own. It's happened. Let me answer the question real quick, if you don't mind. I'm going to try to state it again. What happens if you pay for something and the costs go up? Let's go back to my $5,000 example. In 2013. 20 years later, 2033, the exact same items, because we itemize everything that we set aside, and there's a list with the escrow agent of what the items were paid. Right now, today at Martinson's, the embalming fee is $600. In 2033, maybe it's $1,000. No matter what the items go up, we will submit a bill, in her example, 20 years from now, at the current rate for all those items. So the embalming was $1,000. The casket went from $1,000 to $1,500. So let's say that the funeral now is $7,500 for the exact same items, $2,500 more than it was 20 years before. The Martinson family, or the funeral homes in Michigan, I can only speak for Michigan, the Martinson family, in my case, is hoping that the $5,000 grew to $7,500. If it does not, Mr. Martinson eats the difference. It's very important. That's where the guarantee comes from. It's the funeral home, in this case my boss, is taking the risk, not the family. Because remember, it's not my money. It's your money that you can take with you wherever you want. Now, a little qualifier, if you will. The state of Michigan allows, if you went somewhere else, in my example, you went to Scottsdale, the state of Michigan allows Mr. Martinson to take 10% of what it grew to. That's what the law says he could do, because you didn't use us. So we have to get paid for the time that we spent to pre-plan, right? So the law says that he can take 10%. I've worked there 30 years, they've never done it. I can't say what my other colleagues do, but that's what the law says. And the reason I bring it up to you is if that ever happens and the funeral home took 10%, you'll know why. Okay, sorry, you're over in the corner there. You gotta keep looking over that way a little more. Did that answer your question? It's the funeral homes that are taking the risk. As long as it's trusted properly. Yes?
At Mount Carmel Cemetery in Wyandotte,
Mm-hmm.
a part of the cemetery, this is the old cemetery, a part of it has been set aside for green funerals.
Yep.
And they've already buried several people.
Yes. Green funerals, everybody heard of that? Okay, well,
Newspaper.
yeah, a green funeral basically is the environmentalist, if you're an environmentalist. There's no metal of any kind in the casket. You don't even have to have a casket. They'll let you bury them in a shroud, which is made of cotton or linen. I don't think I've done anything with wool, but anything that's God-made, cotton, linen, wool, will totally, in the ground, will decompose over time. Ladies might think about that when you bring us pantyhose. I don't know. I've often wondered if they dig up our civilization 500 to 1,000 years from now, what they're going to find. Nylon doesn't do anything as far as I know. Acrylic. Why would I say acrylic? Dentures? Who knows? We may have a perfect skeleton 500 years from now with a real nice set of false teeth. I can't say that I brought it up, someone has brought it to my attention. I got a pretty wild sense of humor, but I wouldn't have brought that one up. Yes?
And also, I have seen ads in some of the Catholic magazines that I read. I think it's a Trappist monk. They have to support themselves, the Trappists,
Yeah.
that have gone into
The casket
this,
business.
the casket business,
Yeah.
but it is very, it's close to the pine box idea.
It is, it's very simple. A lot of the wood products today, even from the major manufacturers, are very simple. You know, wood is God-made. Metal is man-made. My whole life I've always said that God doesn't make anything that's junk. So, you know, we had wood way before we had metal caskets, and men would make them by hand, one at a time. But the Trappist monks, if you go to their website, you can see what they are. And there's lots of different ones, but they're real basic. They don't use metal, they use dowels to hold the things together. The hinges are made out of wood instead of metal. In other words, it's ashes to ashes, totally. And that's the idea of the green burial. There's no embalming. Environmentalists are worried about the embalming fluid doing something into the soil. But yes, there is a green burial option. We are the only, to my knowledge, the only funeral home down there that's certified to be a green burial funeral. We spent the money and did the training to do that. It hasn't gone over real big, but Martinsons are all about all the options. And I would like to think that my colleagues at some point would be all about all the options, but I know that that's not reality. We don't just make available certain things to the families. Everything you could think of that has anything to do with the funeral, traditional or otherwise, either myself or John Martinson or someone from our staff can make it happen. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, sir.
You say that you have a menu you could select from.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, the viewing at the funeral home.
Mm-hmm.
You can say, I want 1 day, 2 days, 3 days.
Exactly.
Okay, and if you don't need a casket and you have a crypt, what do you view the body in?
Everybody hear his question? If you don't have a casket, but you have a crypt or grave, what do you view the body in? Whatever you choose. Probably the craziest thing that I've ever done is a lace wood chair. This just happened last year. But before that, I'm serious, dead serious, no pun intended. When I was, it'd be about the time that Father Bill and I met. This is 25 years ago. In fact, his anniversary was 25 years ago. It was a 14-year-old boy from Wyandotte, Italian fellow who died of leukemia. The funeral was at Our Lady of Mount Carmel. It was huge. I think every Italian person that lived within 20 miles of here was there. It was absolutely huge. And I became real close to his family, blah, blah. I get invited back to the memorial mass every year, et cetera, et cetera. But initially, they were going to have him laid out, if you will, or in state, I-N-S-T-A-T-E is the proper term, in state in his bed at the funeral home instead of a casket. I think part of that probably was denial by his parents. You know, if you see the casket, it's real. And I'm going to address the viewing, by the way, that's why we do viewing, it's real. But I think it's last summer, I don't know, the time flies as I get a little older. Last summer, it was at our West Road office in Trenton. We had a gentleman that was laid out in his, or in state, in his lazy boy. Yes, he was embalmed, but instead of the casket being there, he was literally in his lazy boy. Legs, crossed over. Clicker is in his hand. The family brought his man's room and reset it up in one of our chapels. They had a football field on the floor, you know, paper football field. His hockey, Red Wing hockey sweaters and all the other stuff hanging. Posters, sports memorabilia, baseball bats, basketball. The guy was a sports nut. Absolutely, it was awesome. Was it a little off the wall? So what, is my point. Who am I, or who are Martinsons to judge? Martinson Funeral Home, as long as it's not illegal, will let you do it. And I would hope that my colleagues figure this out, that if they don't start doing some of this stuff, that people will go somewhere where they can. What happened with this lady that I felt so bad for her is that she called our office about a month or 6 weeks before her husband had died. He was a hospice patient. And she called our office, and we have a full-time chaplain on our staff. Some of you may have met Fred Sislo. Fred's a former hospice chaplain. Was in the seminary for a while. But anyway, Fred took the call, and she asked Fred about, can my husband be available lazy boy? Well, he didn't know what to say. But Fred's been trained to say, I don't know. But let me find someone that can help you. I happen to be there. So he put her on hold. I said who I was. I mean, I didn't tell her I was the general manager. I just introduced myself as one of the directors. And she said to me, my husband wants to be laid out as lazy boy. Is that okay? And I said, of course you can. Dead silence. Within that 5 or 6 seconds, I realized that this lady had been calling around. We weren't the first funeral home that she asked that question, but I was the first one that told her it was okay. Everybody thought it was a little wild, but we did it. And my point of that is that it's way outside the box, and if outside the box works, no pun intended, outside the box, we're going to do it. There's some, we've done some pretty real cool things. Melton Motors, those of you that are from downriver, Mr. Melton was the Volkswagen dude. When Mr. Melton died, they brought an empty Beetle into the funeral home. The Volkswagen Beetle was set up on the left of the casket there. It was him, just like when the tomato plant was Mr. Tomato. So let me see if there's one more thing that I figure, then you can keep asking. Yes, sir.
Well, I still don't understand what to do the body.
My answer was it doesn't have to be anything. It could be nothing,
If you
or a wood box, or a casket, or
use,
a cot, a lazy boy chair. You could bring me a lawn chair.
does the casket go into the crypt?
If you choose a casket, yes. Let's use Our Lady of Hope as an example. Our Lady of Hope doesn't require a casket, but they require something rigid. So if you were laid out in the lazy boy, like this gentleman was, I couldn't take him to the cemetery without putting him in at least a wood box, so that the workers could pick up the box and put it into the crypt. So in this case, the family didn't need to purchase a casket. They decided to purchase a wood box. In this case, the gentleman was cremated afterwards. So he was placed into a cremation container, and that's what we took to the crematory. I hope I answered your question. I'm not quite sure I did. The point is that you don't.
I'm going to be laid out in the funeral home in state.
Okay.
And I'm going to have a Catholic mass.
Yes.
And then I'm going to go in the crypt. But I don't want to buy a $7,000 casket if I don't need it.
Right.
What am I going to need?
Well, you could be.
Where do you normally see somebody laying in state?
Normally, a casket. The least expensive casket that our firm offers is less than $600. Why that's important is that our service fees for a traditional Catholic funeral, and I'm going to round the numbers and make it easy for you to remember. Our service fees for a traditional Catholic funeral, the use of the funeral home, the visitation, the cars that we need, directing the funeral, meeting with Father Bill, doing all the details, all of it. Life insurance, real estate, veteran stuff, all of it. There's no outside things. Is around $4,200. So in my example, if this gentleman wants to be laid out in a church and he wants a casket, you got $570 for a casket. Our Lady of Hope doesn't require a crypt, so the total bill of the funeral home would be $5,000, approximately. Or you take the $44,000 fixed cost and spend $7,000 on the casket, was what you said you didn't want to do. The funeral was exactly the same. Didn't have any better quality. We still came to church. Father Bill's voice was as beautiful as ever. But in my second example, the family spent $6,500 more than he did. Didn't mean they had a better funeral. Because our service fees were the same. You still got Tom, you still got Martinson's, all the love and support from us, regardless of what you spend on merchandise, or I call it stuff. And I know I'm not trying to be flip, but a lot of people think and are led to believe that they need this stuff. I did not go to mortuary school to sell stuff. I went there to be a funeral service professional. And so I don't like it when people refer to me as being someone in the funeral industry. I'm not an industrialist. I'm a funeral service professional, just like Father Bill is a clergy professional. We provide a service, not stuff. Now, is there stuff that's needed sometimes? Yes. Now that I answer your question?
Yes, you did, thank you.
The point of all this, folks, is that you are in charge. Don't let anybody in my business lead you into something that you do. And I'm not saying that they're right. I'm not trying to throw my colleagues under the bus, because they're great people. But you are in control, not us. It's very important. Do I have time to answer more questions?
Tom, I have a comment or a question. There are times when
I'm sorry, I'll come back to you. I promise.
There are times when what the funeral director will allow a family to do is not something the church would uphold.
True.
Sometimes there's a tension. For example, dividing up grandma's ashes to put in jewelry, that's a church no. You don't divide up someone's remains, ever. Sending somebody's ashes under a tree up north, that's a no-no. You never do that. That's disrespectful to their remains. One question I have is like, if somebody's laid out in a lazy boy, but they want a Catholic liturgy, well, we need them on something. Like the liturgy kind of demands a different sort of presentation. What can you do to help a family like that where they want a non-traditional time at the funeral home and want to couple that with a very traditional church liturgy?
That's a terrific question.
How do we do that?
Everybody heard him? Okay, so we'll use our lazy boy guy. If we were to come to church, we would have to either tell the family that the church is going to require that he's in a wood tray of some kind so we can put it on the church truck. It's called that's what we call it, a church comes to church that the casket sits on. So you either have to do something other than a casket so he could be laid in it. Probably require that it had 4 sides on top so we can place the pall on it. So in our case, in Martin's case, the least expensive thing you can do would be a solid wood box. Sides, bottom, top, everything's, it's 6 nails with the top on. So the lazy boy guy would be in the wood box, and in our firm it's $150 for that wood box. We'd come to church, he'd have the mass, and he's either buried or cremated after that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, what I wanted to point out was that we in the church rely on you as the director to be aware of some of the church's practices,
Of course.
so they won't guide you in a direction that's contrary to the plans you're trying to make. Because you're not doing just the funeral home, you're also doing the church and the cemetery. And so part of the role of the funeral director is to help coordinate those disparate pieces.
Right. We have to at least have an idea of what the churches do, or what the church's teachings are. Where it becomes very comfortable for me, and I assume my colleagues feel the same way, is if because I'm a Catholic funeral director, and I know what the church teaches, I can sort of guide them there, but if they're going to fight it, it's not my role to do that. It's Father Bill's role, right? You follow? As much as I want to. There has been some clergy over the years that I don't particularly care for because of the way they treat the families. But I can't personally speak about that. I can't get in the middle. I don't have that issue with him. But you can imagine sometimes how awkward that is. I'm going to call him this gentleman first.
You mentioned life insurance, okay? I have a trust, and within the trust, I have a specific individual as trustee. And all of my assets were in the trust, including life insurance. You mentioned life insurance through your company. Would you handle this life insurance also, even though I have the trust?
Mm-hmm.
When the proceeds come back, do they come back all into the trust? Or do you get a portion of that?
That's a great question. He has a trust, and part of that trust has got life insurance. Your life insurance lists the trustee as the beneficiary.
Yes.
If the beneficiary is the person that's making the funeral arrangements and the life insurance allows what they call an assignment of proceeds, meaning that the beneficiary can assign, I'll go back to my $5,000 funeral example, $5,000 to be sent directly to Martinson. So in the life insurance worth $50,000, the beneficiary will get $45,000. I'm sorry, $45,000, and the funeral will get a check for $5,000. It's called an insurance assignment. A lot of the companies don't do that anymore because of the privacy laws, HIPAA. But our firm handles, even if it went to somewhere else, our firm will help fill out the claim forms, because someone has to fill out a claim when there's a death. The family either has to do it, or et cetera. Our staff does it all the time, so they're familiar with most of the insurance company's forms, and so we assist the family with filling out the documents.
Another question. I was born and raised on the East Coast, and I've been living here for 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
If my wife and I came to you, more or less, can you obtain what they call open couch casket?
Sure. Everybody hear me say? Yeah. He wanted to know if I could get an open couch casket. Those are called full couch. You were close. Those of us that live here see half couch caskets, where the head end of the casket's open. In different parts of the country, Pennsylvania's real big on those. Most of the big manufacturers make them both ways, full couch or half couch. Which one you use is really a regional or a local, what's the word I'm looking for? Tradition. Yeah.
I've seen the hats, okay, here, and I know that they have back east on full or open.
Mm-hmm.
Here in the Midwest, Michigan, okay, on the half column, the bottom part, no matter what you pay for the cost, not finished like the front.
Mm-hmm. He's made kind of a general statement. That's true for some manufacturers and some models, not true for others. There are many caskets that are completely finished on both ends, even if you're not seeing both ends. All you got to do is ask to see the other end, or ask. But they may not have, the intricacies of the detail, but they're all finished. A lot of the manufacturers have adjustable beds. I know that sounds funny, but these are standard adult size caskets. All of us are standard adults. But the adjustable beds allow us as funeral directors or embalmers, I'm an embalmer as well, allows us to position the person so hopefully they look as comfortable as someone that's, I'm 165 pounds and somebody else might be 210 or even, 100. So,
Last question.
sure.
I don't know if you want to address the group or me separately after the meeting, but what is embalming, what does it do, what do you use it say?
I could give a whole seminar on just that. I'll give you a brief example. If all of you have access to the internet, I would do that, do an internet search, and it's been a while since I've looked, but there are videos that you can actually watch on YouTube of embalming and this kind of thing. Embalming is basically a surgical procedure, but the patient's not alive. The circulatory system of a human being or any mammal has arteries and veins all the way to one cell, up to the largest vessel in the human is the aorta, and the vena cava is the vein. So if you can picture one cell, with my finger, there's a capillary and there's a vein, and they're one cell thick. And oxygen goes to each of those cells through the cell wall when we breathe, and our bloodstream is pumping throughout our body, exchanging that, and it just keeps repeating. So picture the bloodstream, my finger all the way to my heart, or my little toe, and back to my heart, and it just keeps, all of it's doing around. Well, the embalming chemicals do the same thing, and they use the same circulatory system to bathe the cells, one cell at a time, and replace the blood and the fluid with embalming chemicals. The main preservative in embalming chemicals is formaldehyde. It's what pathologists use to fix tissues. They look at slides when they're doing sections to find out people got cancer or any of that kind of stuff. So this embalming happens one cell at a time, times millions of cells. And so we make a surgical incision somewhere in the body. For most modern moments, it's in the neck area. We use the carotid artery and the jugular vein to use a visual aid. My carotid artery is probably about the size of my finger. My aorta is probably the size of my thumb. It varies depending on the size of the person. So, I mean, the vessels are pretty good size. So because the carotid artery is relatively big, we can make an incision in the neck, in the clavicle area. Incision is probably a couple inches long. And with surgical tools, I can go into that incision and extract the artery, which is pretty flexible for those of us that are healthy. And we put a ligature on it. It's like a suture that a physician would use. We do the same thing to the vein. So once I have the two, they're together, they run in pairs. The vein, the artery, and the nerve run together like that. So I take a pair of surgical scissors and I cut into the artery, much like a surgeon would do if they're doing a stent. Anybody that's ever had, they have to go into your iliac artery usually, and the surgeon cuts surgical scissors and puts a stent, and they run it up into your heart, and they do their cardio cath, and it's the same sort of thing. So I'm in the artery, I use a pair of scissors to make a small hole. I take a stainless steel tube, it's called a cannula, which is probably about this long in the carotid sense, and it's got a little bit of a hook on the end of it, so it's like the shape of an L, small L. I put the stainless steel tube, and sometimes they're made of, not stainless, they're brass, but they're stainless steel coated. Put it in there. The other end on the L has got a little hole on it where a surgical tube, a rubber tube would go on the end of it. The tube goes over to a tank. It's called the embalming tank or the embalming machine. That replaces what the heart would normally do. The heart's pumping blood. The machine is going to do that. So we mix the embalming chemicals, and that's a whole other, it's mortuary school to figure out what you're going to do with that. It's not one concoction for everybody. So we mix a solution, and we turn the machine, and now it pumps fluid into the artery instead of the blood. So what you can imagine, in with the new and out with the old. The vein that I have there has another hole in it, and another device. It's called a drainage tube. So as the chemical goes in, the blood is coming out. It goes onto a surgical table, just like in the hospital. It goes into a sanitary sink, and it's flushed into the sanitary sewer, just like at the hospitals. So I'm not trying to oversimplify it because it's not a real simple process, but it's basically in with the new, out with the old, 1 million cells at a time. The process takes a couple hours, depending on the patient. If the person has an autopsy first, it's a lot more complicated, but basically we have to do the same sort of thing. I mean, we can talk at length for hours, but I know you can go online and we get lots of information. Probably a lot more scientific than I'm telling you. But I find if you talk up to people, they don't like that. So I try to make it in simple terms to people. Who else has got questions? I have time for Bill. I don't have to get right back.
We're going to wrap up by definitely in the next 15, 20 minutes.
You tell me.
Yeah. 15, 20
And
minutes.
folks, before I forget, I meant to bring a piece of, I had a pad. I was going to have you write your names down if you needed me to call you with specific questions. And I did bring some material that you're welcome to take. There's no obligation whatsoever. They're general. And one of them is veterans. For any of you that are veterans, first of all, thank you for your service to our country. I'm very appreciative of that. Because there's some veterans benefits that are available to veterans that most veterans don't even know about. And anything that's in that veterans packet, our firm can actually help you do it. It makes it sound like you have to do it. It's just showing you some of the forms that are in there. But our firm would guide you through all that documentation. So, go ahead.
If a person dies at home, and I assume you call 911, who claims the body at that point? If a person dies at the hospital, who claims the body? How does the Wayne County coroner enter into things? And how does the funeral home enter into things if a person hasn't pre-planned or made their wishes known that they want to go to Choke Pepper next to Martin's?
Sure. Let's do them one at a time, if you don't mind. So your first one was,
At home.
at home, do you have to call 911? The answer is no, you do not have to call 911. If you call 911, the police are coming, fire engines are coming, they're coming, guns ablazing. They legally have to. It isn't a small fire. They can't take that liability. They come they're required, if you call 911, to come with sirens. Sometimes they'll bring the rescue unit will come. So if you want that to happen, you call 911. If the person's home and been dying, whether they're under hospice care or not, just call the police department's business line.
Police department, non-emergency.
Non-emergency. Yeah. If you call 911, it's required by the fire department and the police departments in these municipalities. They're coming. They don't know whether it's a little emergency or a big one. I learned that mistake years ago. We had a small fire at our funeral home in Allen Park. It's all cedar. Any of you that have ever been there, the outside is all cedar. And they were putting cigarette butts out in our flower pots. I thought it was just a little fire. By the time they got there, it was just a little. And if I'd have told them, don't worry, it's a little, they wouldn't have brought all the trucks. They brought everything. Martinson's in Allen Park is one of the biggest buildings in Allen Park. And that's when I learned from the fire chief that we have to come and assume that your whole place is burning. Which makes sense. Okay, your second question was?
If a person dies at the hospital, who are the things about?
The same as at the house. Normally the hospital is going to try to determine who the next of kin is. If they're at the hospital, they've been an inpatient or in the emergency room, they've identified their family normally. So they'll release the remains to the next of kin. And there's a pecking order, by the way. Spouse, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, parents, brothers and sisters. I can't say that's what the hospitals always do, but from claiming the body, if you will, that's what the funeral home has to determine who the next of kin is. I'm one of 7 kids, so if one of my parents was deceased, my mom and dad are both alive. If one of them was already deceased and then the next one died, all 7 of those kids have equal right to take care of my dad and my mother. Not just me, because I'm the oldest.
And how long do you think a hospital is going to allow that body to be there after?
That's a great question. How long will the hospital hold the remains? Depends on whether they have refrigeration facilities or not, I would think. Each hospital probably has their own requirements and their own protocols, but if they have refrigeration facilities, then it could be longer. There are many small communities, small hospitals that don't have refrigeration facilities, so it's a whole other set of circumstances for the hospitals.
Could we go back to the non-emergency call that the person would make if a person dies at home?
Sure.
What is the non-emergency police officer going to ask?
They'll come to the house and find out if the person's been under any type of medical care, determine the age. They'll look around the room. I'm not a police officer, but I kind of know what they do. They look for drugs. They look for foul play. They look for any injuries. They look for blood. Is there blood on the floor? They look for all kinds of things. And then they have to report it. They call the medical examiner's office. There is no coroner in Michigan. They're called the medical examiners in Michigan. The Wayne County Medical Examiner will be contacted by Riverview Police in a non-emergency situation. We have John Doe has died, or whatever the person's name is, age 84, has been under doctor's care for blah, 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 blah. We've already talked to Dr. ABC, who's agreed to, yes, I've been treating him. So the investigator at the medical examiner's office will determine whether or not the information, the answers they're getting are sufficient, that there's no foul play, that they don't need to see the body. I guess that's the bottom line. If they don't get the right answer, then whether the family wants the person to go downtown or not, the medical examiner's office will come to that place of death and take the body from the house down to the Wayne County Medical Examiner's office and do whatever investigating they need to do. When they're finished with their investigation, and only when they're finished, will they then release the body back to the family, who can get a hold of whatever funeral they want to, and then, with the signed release, our office goes to the medical examiner's office, and it states that Martinson Funeral Home is okay for Mary Smith to pick up Joe Smith. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
If something happened to me, I'm fairly healthy. I remember the day when I thought there would be no way I'd have to take medication. Only my parents have to take medication. And of course, now I have 3 or 4 different medications, but I'm relatively healthy. If something were to happen to me and I dropped dead, I can almost guarantee you that the medical examiner is going to want to know why. That my body would be taken to the medical examiner. Because there's no reason I should just drop dead. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of circumstances. The age, did anybody see the patient fall down the stairs? No matter how old they are. If a 90-year-old fell down the stairs and there was no one there, they're probably going to investigate.
Well, what if you're killed in a traffic accident? Where does your body go? why would they send you to a hospital if you're pronounced dead at the scene? Can you talk about that?
I don't know that they do take a to the hospital if you're pronounced dead at the scene. Medical examiner's office would come to the scene normally. I have friends that are medics, paramedics, and the only time they take patients to the hospital is if they have a pulse or if there's a chance that this patient can be saved.
Okay.
If they die at the scene, then the medical examiner's office would take the remains from the scene before they stay to the medical examiner's office.
Where is that in Detroit, you said?
Yes, it's on the corner of Warren and it's just east of I-75 on Warren. I can't think, Rockville? Not Rockville. Kind of by the Eastern Market there.
Could be.
It's the next exit north of Mac is Warren, just to the east. Used to be downtown.
And one last thing I want to take.
These are all great questions, by the way. And there's nothing you can ask me that's silly. My grandpa Craig used to say the only silly question, Tom, is the one you don't answer. And I find that when I do talks like this, I'll have somebody come up to me later. You know what? I'm glad she asked that because I was asking the same question. I was just afraid. Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking that if one does know which funeral home they want to deal with, and a person dies at home, could you just go ahead and call that funeral home and they'll just take it from?
Well, you asked me two questions. You could go ahead and call the funeral home, but I would ask you, if you were calling me, has the police been there? So you'd say no. You need to call the police.
The non-emergency.
Yep. Or in a lot of cases today, hospice is real big. Anybody had experience with hospice?
It's a good.
Yeah, I had the privilege of serving on the board of directors of Arbor Hospice for 6 years. One of the cool. I've been volunteering, as Father Bill knows, for my whole career. Lots of volunteer. That's what I was taught to do, and I've enjoyed it very much. But being on the board of directors of Arbor Hospice is one of the coolest things I've ever done. But a lot of in this case, the medical examiners know that if the person's on hospice, there's an established case, a company that's taking care of this patient. So there's a medical records, there's history, etc. But there are cases, even if the person's under hospice, if for some reason the person was under hospice and everybody had left the house and they found the patient at the bottom of the stairs, I'm pretty sure based on my experience that even if they're under hospice care, the medical examiner would want to see the remains. How did that patient get downstairs? Were they pushed? Were they drugged? I mean, I don't watch a lot of TV, but this is why these laws exist, to protect us from foul play. You know, someone got a big concussion on their head, or it's bleeding all over the place, and no one saw this patient fall. Even though they're elderly, the medical examiner sometimes will determine that they want to know how that fall happened. Did someone push them and leave? So these are a lot of unknowns. Someone else has their hand up over here.
In one of the handouts that we get once in a great while in church, in the bulletin, there was one several years ago about funerals, Catholic funerals.
From the Archdiocese?
And it mentioned, I remember being quite struck by, it mentioned that the Catholic Church's preference is for having the body intact for the funeral, if you're going to cremate. And then you have the mass, you have the wake or whatever you want, and then you have mass, but you have a viewing or so, but you have the body intact. And then after the mass and all the other ceremonies, then you go to cremate.
I think they haven't changed their stance. have they not?
That's correct. And in the third session of this program, when we're talking about the funeral liturgy itself, we're going to be giving you a copy of the newest document from the Archdiocese.
Bishop
That
Vigneron
answers
just
those
did a new
questions.
one, did he not?
Archbishop Vigneron issued a new document last year,
Yeah.
and we're going to give you a copy of that.
And I've
That
read it.
answers some of those questions.
Well, because I know for families who choose cremation because it's something they can afford.
Right. The church prefers to have the body for a funeral, but we're okay if we have cremation.
Let me address
Because
this.
we understand why some might choose immediate cremation.
If I may, brought up a book, it's very difficult, because this is such a big topic. It's very difficult for me to cover it in a short period of time. There are a lot of folks today that are choosing cremation because they think it's cheaper. I don't like the word cheap. None of us are cheap. God didn't make junk. It's less expensive. But the part that's less expensive for most of us Catholics is not the funeral portion. You've eliminated what you'd spend at Our Lady of Hope, or at Holy Sepulchre, or at Michigan Memorial, or at Mount Carmel. You've eliminated the traditional cemetery expenses. So at Our Lady of Hope, for example, I believe the least expensive grave there right now is $1,000 or $1,200, something like that.
But they do have crypts for ashes.
Hold on, I know we're talking. Why cremation is less expensive? So if you don't need to buy a full grave, and you don't need to pay $1,000 or $1,300 for the opening and closing of that grave for a total of $2,300 or $2,400, $2,400 at the cemetery versus $230, which is the current crematory charge, you do the math. $2,500, $230, which is less expensive. Cremation, but the $4,000 funeral just happened at Mass. There are a lot of people that think it's either cremation or not. And as a Catholic funeral director, I want to make sure all of us Catholics know that if you want to have a traditional funeral first, even if you're going to be cremated, you can. And there are a lot of folks that don't know that. It's either cremation or not. So the less expensive part is mainly the cemetery expenses. But a simple cremation is, like I said, $1,500 versus $7,000 for the average traditional funeral. So it is less expensive, but it isn't just the funeral home part. Most of us need the closure to be able to say goodbye. My mother, I talked about her earlier. My mom had to fly to California when I was just a baby to take care of her dad who died, and it haunted her for a long time. And the reason I found out as I graduated from college is my mom was forced to see her dad dead. She didn't like that. She didn't realize she needed it, but she didn't like it. So in her mind, because it was so uncomfortable for her, she didn't want to have that to do anyway. And that's when her friend died. She realized how important it was. Because my mom basically pretended her dad didn't die for all those years. Because she didn't see him. See, it really didn't happen. And that's why people psychologically need the closure for most of us. And it really hits home when we have a 9/11, or someone's drowned and they can't find the body, or they're in a bad car accident, they're burned beyond recognition. I can't even give them a chance to say goodbye and put their arms around the fact that their little boy was killed. Whereas awful as it is, if I can present them with his remains, they can at least move on from the point that it happened, get counseling from their parish or whatever it is, but they can move on. It's absolutely awful for me to watch the psychological turmoil when people do. The one lady said to me, Tom, it's like coming to the birthday without the birthday boy being there. Never thought of it that way, but it's kind of the psychological sort of thing. So think long and hard about what your wishes are. Anybody? Can I go to Hemi as an instrument? Yeah, sure.
Just for clarification, I have a plot in the suburb of Chicago, and just to go back to what you said about transferring the body, you would initiate the plans here?
Sure, absolutely. You'd have two choices. Either you contact your local funeral home in Chicago, or my mom's from Rockford, and they would contact somebody here locally, or if you're here, we would arrange to get you there. Just in the last week alone, I've sent someone to Tennessee. We've been to Northern Michigan twice, Wisconsin, Milwaukee. You know, it's sort of like under the cover of darkness. It just, all you know is when you came to Martinson's, everything was done. When we come to Mass, Father has everything ready. Well, it's just sort of like that in our day. I was telling Kay that the most stressful part of my job every single day, and this is very stressful, because we have deadlines, no pun intended. I did the schedule for today we have 7 buildings, so I did the schedule for everybody today. So when I go to bed last night, we can get 5 or 6 or 7 or however many new death calls. It totally changed the schedule. I was meeting with the family this morning. I don't want to rush them, but I knew I had to be here at 12:30. I met with them at 9:20. They were 15 or 20 minutes late. I'm already thinking, oh boy, I want to give them all the love and attention that they deserve, but I made a commitment to Father that I'd be here at 12:30. So I couldn't help but be a little stressed out. And we're flying by the seat of our pants. We got visiting hours scheduled for you at 2 o'clock. You'd be amazed what happens in our office between 1 and 2. And you walk in and everything's, and the phone's ringing off the hook. Yep. I want to thank you again for inviting me, Father Bill. Okay, thank you very, very much. I'm privileged, really. It's my privilege to be here. I did bring some material that anybody wants. This is a general pre-planning guide. It's not a Martinson planning guide, so you can use it wherever you like. You're welcome to take one of those. I did put a funeral home sticker on the back. There's a business card inside each of those, and any of you that are veterans, I would suggest you take one of these as well. I'll hang around for a little while if anybody wants to. Is that okay? Thank you again for having me.
As I said, we're going to have 2 more sessions, so some of these questions will apply to other sessions. Next week, we're going to hear from a representative from Our Lady of Hope Cemetery, who represents all the archdiocesan cemeteries, talking about some of the things Tom already talked about regarding crypts and vaults and earth burial. So they'll speak to us about that, the requirements for burial and Our Lady of Hope and other diocesan cemeteries. So some of your questions will apply to her as well. The third session, we're going to provide you with the church's perspective on death, planning your own funeral liturgy and keeping in mind some of the requirements of funeral liturgy and how, as I asked Tom, sometimes we've got to sort of pick and choose what we want, keeping in mind like the 3 stages of death: the funeral home, the church, and then the cemetery. Got to make sure all those can work together. So sometimes what you might want here doesn't work there or there, or vice versa. So we try and put all that together when we talk about the funeral liturgy of the 3rd session. Thanks so much for coming. Have a great afternoon. Mass at 5 o'clock.